Babylon, man, I've been so torn thinking about this world lately. Babylon, truth is so deluded and it drives me crazy. Babylon,
This lost world is so hopeless.
Babylon,
Jesus Christ, that's where hope is.
Babylon, no matter what they
Yeah.
say, it's still so lost,
listen.
so rough.
The Lord reigneth, he is clothed with majesty. The Lord is clothed with strength, wherewith he hath girded himself. The world also established, that it cannot be moved. Thy throne is established of old. Thou art from everlasting. The floods have lifted up, O Lord, the floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, yea, than many mighty waves of the sea. Thy testimonies are very sure. Holiness becometh thine house, O Lord, forever. That is Psalm 93. And this is Resisting Balaam, a podcast where we seek to encourage the saints to stand firm with him on his word against all of the accusations made by the world, the flesh, and the devil, as we engage the culture of death that demands the sacrifice of our children. I am Callie, and this is a Wrath and Grace podcast, so go check out the guys at wrathandgrace.com. Make sure to like and share this content. Come support us on Patreon at patreon.com/resisting Balaam. Okay, today I would like to talk about pro-life organizations and their unwillingness, specifically of like the major influencers and organization heads and leaders within pro-life organizations, their lack of willingness to engage abolitionists generally in the public arena of debate or on podcasts and things like that. There is a reluctance on their part to debate doctrine. And what brought this topic out is next month, Wrath and Grace is hosting a conference in California at a Calvary Chapel church on engaging culture. It's got Vodi Bakum, Owen Strand, which are two platformed personalities that Jay is the booking manager for. But in addition to that, Seth Gruber is on the lineup to speak. And then this was brought to my attention a couple of weeks ago. And so I talked to Jay and trying to get to the bottom of what's going on here. And there were a couple of things that I thought about as this was brought to my attention, that this incrementalist apologist under Scott Klusendorf and their organization, who now works for Love Life, and the platforming being done by Wrath and Grace, who published my book and hosts this podcast. So there were a bunch of things that came to mind as I was thinking about this, and one of them, which is going to be important later, is I'm not big on censoring people or deplatforming them or not giving people a place to speak, to promote their ideas, regardless of how bad or wrong their ideas are. Let them explain it. And if they are as horrible as they are, then they ought to be mocked for them. But that's a different story. And I don't think that deplatforming people or taking people off of conferences is the right move. Now, with that said, I think there are times not to link up with people when it comes to conferences or events. For example, I think it would be not a good idea to participate in an event where it's being promoted as Christian, and or even just a regular event not being specifically targeted as Christian, that has, let's say, prayers being offered by apostate Roman Catholics or the New Apostolic Revival people, the Seven Mountain Dominists, or any other heretic / non-Christian. And I think I would have an issue with joining together and what they would think of as worship, or if like a Muslim or Jehovah's Witness is praying for whatever thing is going on. I would have an issue with that. And then depending on the topic or type of event, I might have issues with speakers, but that would be on a case-by-case basis. I understand why some people might be upset that it may look like there's a promotion of incrementalism, and that's not really what's going on. And that said, I think the way that the whole thing came about is horrible. Jay's trying to have a conference. He's trying to work with Calvary Chapel people, and he enlists Brian Ottinger from Love Life to put something together. And Brian, unfortunately, not thinking things all the way through from my perspective, hooks up with this Calvary Chapel church and organizes the use of the building, contracted, and all of this. Well, one of the members of the church where the building is, that this conference is going on, is Seth Gruber, who is an anti-abolitionist. He's not just like some regular out there pro-life person. He is an anti-abolitionist. For a long time, been working with Scott Klusendorf as part of their apologetics organization, teaching people, Christians and secular people, how to defend their doctrine as apologists for pro-life and pro-life incrementalism in particular. So he's an anti-abolitionist, he's an anti-immediatist, has a history of butting heads with and pushing out anti-abolitionist rhetoric. And then there is kind of an issue with that. But like I said, when people came to me and said that he was speaking, so I went and had some group messages with Jay and Brian, and then eventually with Seth, some text messages and phone calls. But really, I even told them that my intention is not to have him censored, not to have him removed from the conference. However, I wanted to let Brian know that I think that he did a horrible job, and I'm still upset with how Brian reacted with all of this stuff and the aftermath. I understand he's trying to play peacemaker, but really, from my perspective, he was the problem in this whole entire thing, Brian. So, all of that, I'm saying all of that to say I don't think it's okay to censor people. I don't think it's okay to deplatform people, because what I believe in is defending your doctrine. Let the doctrine be explained, defended, and the truth will come out. I don't think that it's appropriate to restrict or censor anti-Christian doctrine, which is what I believe incrementalism is. I think that incrementalism is anti-Christian. I think it's wrong. I think it's horrible doctrine, and the application, I think, is bad. I do think that there are Christians, actual Christians, that really hate abortion, that really do love Jesus, and are caught up in this lie being promoted by the pro-life establishment. So yeah, I think gradualism, incrementalism, I think it is sinful. I agree with Virgil Walker, like what he said at the G3. It is sinful. It is anti-Christian. But so what? Let them defend their position, because they can't. It's inconsistent, and they will not be able to do so. But here's why I had such a big problem, and why I went to Brian and Jay about this. And because I wanted some kind of resolution. I wanted some kind of coming together to reason together and deal with our history, but more importantly, to deal with our doctrinal differences. Not because I think I'm going to change his mind, but because people will watch, see the folly and inconsistency and anti-Christian foundation of gradualism or incrementalism, and hopefully repent and follow Scripture. That would be my goal. But we can't even have those conversations. We can't even have those debates, and it's a shame. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I want to talk about why it is, or just the fact, from my experience dealing with influencers, organization heads, and organization leaders, why they are unwilling to debate or have public moderated conversation and discussions over doctrine, specifically dealing with how to deal with child sacrifice in our country. My hope is that some of these people will hear this and take to heart what I'm saying. So I'm going to be outlining interactions that I've had with a lot of these people. Now, I want to be clear, I am not going to be using anything that I've had private conversations in Facebook Messenger groups, text messages, or phone calls with Seth Gruber in particular. For some reason, he believes that that is a violation of trust. Now, I don't believe that, and I think it's a ridiculous position to have. He believes, or at least he says that it's a violation of trust. Now, there are some things that are said in these text messages or phone calls that I do believe are confidential. There are things that Seth Gruber has told me on the phone that I would not feel comfortable sharing in public, because I think they are legitimately private things that if I were to say, they would violate trust. But most of the conversation of anything that I've had with him, I don't think fits that category. However, for whatever reason, he seems to believe that it is a trust breaker. And so I'm not going to do that because I want to not break his trust. Brian has made it known to me that he's been burned a lot before from abolitionists, and that they've said mean things about him, said bad things about him, so he doesn't trust, and that it would be helpful. Brian told me this, that it would be helpful if over a period of time I built up trust with Seth Gruber, and like maybe got together and had coffee a couple of times over some indefinite amount of time until he feels safe in having a public conversation with me about, starting out what we can all do to resolve this issue so that we might someday get to a point where we can debate doctrinal issues. So I'm going to take Brian's advice. I would like to build this trust, even though I don't think that in order to publicly come together and critique each other's doctrine, that trust needs to be built up, or that we have to have some kind of friendship before we do that. But, if that's what it takes to get him to be willing to talk about what he believes that our side needs to do, and I'm able to publicly say what I think their side needs to do before we can at some point in the future debate doctrine together publicly, then I'm willing to spend the time having coffee with him and not saying publicly what he has said in text messages and phone calls and group things. I will talk about one because it's vital to this whole topic, and he has already talked about it publicly, and since he's talked about it publicly, then I feel that using that information is not violating the trust of private group messages that he's very fond of. So I was in a group message with Sam Riley and Seth Gruber. And it was specifically so that we can work towards having a public discussion, a moderated discussion, a public conversation or moderated debate on a couple of issues, whether or not incrementalism is anti-Christian or not. Whether or not we should prosecute women that unjustly kill their own preborn children. Whether Wilberforce was a gradualist or an abolitionist. I mean, there was a list of ideas that I think are worth having on the public stage from influencers on both sides. Now, Seth, who worked for Scott Klusendorf at Life Institute as an apologist, teaching people, Christians and otherwise, how to defend their doctrinal positions against criticism. And that was their job. So Seth Gruber gets upset at Sam for publicly explaining why Seth would not engage either of us in any of these public conversations or debates or civil discourse meetings. And so Seth publicly rebukes Sam, saying that he violated his trust in this private message by explaining on the Liberator podcast that we had been talking to him about these public discourse possibilities, but that Scott Klusendorf would not allow him to engage with us publicly in these discourses. The reasons were that Scott, the head of this apologetic organization, would not allow him to meet us to defend their doctrinal position because years ago and up through till now, abolitionists have said mean things about him, made ad hominem attacks, and argue in bad faith. So Sam says this on the Liberator, and Seth gets upset at him for violating the trust. I personally find zero wrong with publicly saying, hey, I've requested from this apologetics organization whose sole job is to teach people how to defend their doctrinal position and go out and do it. And they said no, and here's why they said no. I don't see anything wrong with that. That's not one of those should be confidential, private things. He's asking you to a public debate. You said no because your boss wouldn't let you. because he said Russell and others were mean, said bad things about him, did ad hominem attacks, and argued in bad faith. So that's the only private message thing I'm gonna say from Seth, but it's because he actually has talked about it in public. And it's crucial to what I want to talk about today, because that is the standard line that you hear from pro-life leaders and influencers. At least I have, as I've talked to them about engaging with me in debate, civil discourse, public discussions. The standard answer is they won't, because Russell, usually it's Russell, or some other meanie from the AHA, sometimes I'm that meanie, has said mean or bad things about them, done ad hominem attacks, and argues in bad faith. So, here's the thing. I don't really believe that. I think the things that they are claiming are mean things, ad hominem attacks, and bad faith arguments. I don't think that is true necessarily, especially to the extent for the claim that they are making. But let's pretend it is true. Let's pretend that Russell is a jerk. Let's pretend that he ad hominem attacks Scott Klusendorf, Abby Johnson, Mark Harrington, Frank Pavone, Lila Rose, any number of these. Let's say that he actually does that. Let's say that he argues in bad faith. So what? So what? What's that have to do with me, right? Let's say that it's true. I don't believe it's true, but let's say that it is. If you, Scott Klusendorf, run an apologetic organization where you teach people to defend their doctrinal position, and you go out and do it, then go out and do it. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite, and I'll explain why. But this is the standard excuse that I've run into when I've publicly talked to Abby Johnson, Joe Poyman from Texas Alliance for Life, all of them, Mark Harrington and those guys. This is the reason that they have given me as to why they will not engage publicly in debate, doctrine, or have conversation. But here's the thing. And because Seth Gruber did this publicly, I don't think that I'm violating his trust. And so I still want to go have coffee with him so that over a period of time we can be friends and gain trust, so that he'll, as according to Brian, feel safe enough to have a public conversation with me about what pro-life people can do, so that I feel okay with coming to the table to talk to them, and what abolitionists need to do so that we can resolve these differences, so that someday in the future we can come together and publicly debate the doctrine. A couple of weeks after Seth announced that he was upset with Sam for violating the privacy trust of this group message and saying on the Liberator podcast that Life Institute wouldn't debate us because Scott Klusendorf wouldn't allow him to. Shortly after, within a couple of weeks, Seth calls out against pro-choice people, and he calls them cowards. Why won't you come and debate me? It's because you know that you're inconsistent. You're cowards for not defending your doctrinal position on your desire to kill children. I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along that. Calling them cowards. And guess what? He's right. Seth was totally correct in calling these people out for acting like cowards, for not defending their position against criticisms. Seth was totally correct in pointing out the cowardice of the pro-choice establishment in not engaging with him as a public apologist to defend doctrinal positions. So I agree with Seth there. He was totally right to mock the pro-choice people that are inconsistent in their position, but are cowardly, hiding, and unwilling to debate him publicly or have public conversation with him or have civil discourse with him on the public stage. So I applaud Seth for doing that. But that's the hypocrisy. Because he knows that the pro-choice person, or has in the past, to follow the illustration better, attacked with ad hominem, said vile, nasty, horrific things about the pro-life debater. They argue in bad faith. One of the most recent ones I saw, the lady lost her mind within 5 minutes of the debate and stormed off after swearing and saying a whole bunch of really foul things. And Seth from Created Equal did a very good job of exposing that in this public setting. So if you really, Seth Gruber, Abby Johnson, Scott Klusendorf, Frank Pavone, Mark Harrington, all of you guys, if you really believe that we would do nothing but do ad hominem attacks against you, say mean things against you, argue in bad faith, then come meet us and expose us. Expose us like you do the atheists, pro-choice. That's the hypocrisy. That is the hypocrisy that I saw from Scott Klusendorf's organization through Seth Gruber. But they don't believe it's hypocrisy. Because the same thing happened with Abby Johnson. They don't believe that it's hypocrisy. And here's why. Here's what every single one of them, like now I'm saying this is coming from my public interaction with Abby Johnson, Mark Harrington, Joe Poyman, and all of these kind of people. When I point out that it's hypocritical Because Abby Johnson did the same thing. She called out pro-choice people for their unwillingness to debate her. She called them cowards, and rightly so. Unwilling to defend their positions because they know they're inconsistent and that they'll come up with really bad excuses as to why they won't debate. I affirm her in that. Just like I affirm Seth Gruber and him calling out cowards for not debating him. But here's what the whole lot of them will say as to why it's not hypocritical for them to do that to a pro-choice person, but to the abolitionist, they can still just marginalize us, say that we're fringe, and ignore our calls to deal with doctrine. It's going to be funny. Because they're atheists. Pro-choice people are atheists, and they expect them to be vile, argue in bad faith, say horrific things, and ad hominem attack them. But we're Christian. So they hold us to a different standard because we're Christian. We're Christian even though they are going to accuse us of the same thing that they accuse the pro-choice person of, the ad hominem attack, the saying bad things about them, arguing in bad faith. But this group, and they have a consensus, whether you're Abby Johnson, Seth Gruber, Mark Harrington, Joe Poyman, there's this consensus that they are Christian, and as Christians, that group looks at the pro-choice person as an atheist and says we expect that, but these abolitionists, we consider them Christian. Here's the problem with that. Abby Johnson is a Catholic. Frank Pavone is a Catholic. Lila Rose, Catholic. So when you have Christians claiming that these Catholics are Christian, there's a problem. There is a doctrinal problem right there. That group of people, all of these pro-life organization leaders, you cannot look at the Catholic and say that they're Christian. We're Protestants. We are protesting against the synagogue of Satan and the false gospel of the Church of Rome. No, but you'll pray with them. You'll have them come to your events and conferences, and you'll pray together. You'll worship together, even though you've been told by the Bible that you shouldn't be unequally yoked. See, that's the issue. You're going to claim that these Roman Catholics are Christian when they are not, and then the group of you are going to say, well, these pro-choice people are atheists, so we expect them to say vile things, to ad hominem attack, and to bad faith argument us. But because you are a Christian, it's not hypocritical for us to call them cowards for not wanting to debate us, but we're unwilling to meet you at the public discourse table. We are unwilling to publicly have debate, civil conversation, or discussion. Because you're a Christian that is going to say mean things, ad hominem attack us, argue in bad faith.
We are Titus 2 women, seeking to glorify God through the teaching of younger women, biblically, to love their husbands, children, and be keepers of the home.
not grudgingly or as a legalistic chore, but rather to joyfully sacrifice in loving their husband and children as unto the Lord.
Giving glory to God and finding joy in caring for our families in only the way wives and mothers can.
As God has blessed us with female traits that make our work in the home essential to a godly home.
It's no secret that true masculinity is being lost. We are attempting to recapture the essence of true godly manhood, biblically balanced just as the Lord intends it to be. We do this by highlighting the interest of the everyday man and pointing them to real wisdom only found in the gospel. One of our top priorities is to shine light on and support ministries on the front lines battling the evil deeds of the flesh and Satan. A portion of all online sales go to ministries such as Resisting Balaam and Bridge Ministries Laredo to further the kingdom and bring glory to his name. So who are we? We are husbands. We are fathers. We are sons. We are friends. And we are brothers. We are reformed man.
The other claim that is made by consensus of these pro-life influencers or leaders within their organizations not only that they consider themselves Christian, which they are not, and they consider abolitionists Christians, which is why they will not debate them, and why it's not hypocritical for them to disengage from defending their doctrinal positions while at the same time they call out the pro-choice person for being cowardly for not engaging with them publicly. So they all pretty much say the same thing. They expect the atheists to do this because, the pro-choice person, because they're atheists, and that it is not hypocritical for them because they are all Christians. They've come to a consensus about abolitionists, and it's not hypocritical for them to not have public debate. It's moderated over doctrinal positions or practice. And the other thing that they claim that I've heard pretty universally is that we want the same thing. We're on the same side. We're not going to debate you because really we're on the same team. We want the same thing. This is what Abby Johnson said several times before blocking. And that's the thing. Scott Klusendorf has another guy. Block. I do have to say, and give credit to the guys that created Equal. At least they're not. They might not engage as much and not talk, but at least they don't block you and censor you from that direction. But they pretty much come down, and I've heard it from several, so that we want the same thing, we're after the same thing, we're on the same team. I won't debate you because of that. And this is how John Siegel from Texas Right to Life said it, right? He was angry with me, or disappointed is I guess the more correct word, because of the way that I've publicly come out against Stephanie Click over the past, year and a half or so. He thinks that there's room for disagreement, that there's room for talking about strategy and philosophy and perspectives. And I will give him this. He was willing to publicly talk to me about some of these issues, and I appreciate that. But he was upset and disappointed because I made comments about Stephanie Click. Now, he thinks that I attacked her and did mischaracterizations of her because I said she hated justice. I went on to explain that I said she hated justice because of the laws that she killed and the ones that she passed, and the lies that her office told me directly, whether it was her chief of staff or some of the aides there, told me about the bill that I was supporting. So it's not a mischaracterization to expose a lie that's told by a representative. But one thing that he said in there is that we're motivated by the same goal, that we're on the same page, that we want the same thing, and that is to uphold justice and protect the vulnerable. And then he goes on to talk about how Stephanie Click stands up for the vulnerable parents. See, because this is the thing. We're not on the same page. We're not on the same team. We don't want the same thing. He might say that they want to uphold justice, but their actions do the opposite. Their actions deny justice. Their actions prevent justice intentionally. So no, we're not on the same team as the pro-life organizations. We're not on the same page. We don't want the same goal. I am not saying that there are not pro-life people out there that hate abortion, want it to end, and have been tricked into believing this anti-Christian doctrine. I believe there are people like that. I'm talking about the doctrine itself. Incrementalist doctrine, gradualist doctrine, is in opposition to immediatist doctrine or biblical doctrine. They cannot co-locate together. They cannot cohabitate together peacefully. There is opposition between the two. And I think many of these people know this. Not all of them. But ones that are unwilling to meet us publicly and have discussions They recognize that there is a difference and they're unwilling to address those differences. But it's not hypocritical for them not to, because we're Christians and they're Christians. And they expect the atheists to do the ad hominem attacks, to say mean things to them, to say foul, nasty things to them, and argue in bad faith. So it's not hypocritical for them to call them cowards for not engaging with them publicly, and them not engage with us publicly, because, you know, we're Christians, including the Catholics. And who knows? Let's throw a Mormon in there too, or a Muslim, as long as he's on their pro-lifey side. You know, we're all Christian. We want the same thing. We got the same goals. No, it's not true. We're not on the same team. We don't have the same side. We are in opposition with each other. And I truly believe that gradualism, incrementalism, is what is delaying the criminalization of abortion. I truly believe that it is the anti-Christian strategy and doctrine of incrementalism that is causing the huge rise of self-managed abortion in Texas in particular. And I would love to have these kind of conversations and discussions with them publicly. But we won't. They will not have these discussions because they say somebody a long time ago, and probably currently now, has argued in bad faith, says mean things, ad hominem attacks. So rather than defending their doctrine and teaching others how to defend their doctrine, they ignore, they marginalize. That's a fringe organization. They're a cult. Don't listen to them. They hate women. They want to execute women, or whatever excuse they want to give. There's going to come a time when these discussions need to be had on a public scale. Okay, yeah. You had one debate 10 years ago, one time. So what? Have the discussion. Now I'm willing to fly Seth Gruber out here and have coffee with him. I'm not going to go to California. I've got no interest in going to California. But I'll have coffee with him. I'll take Brian's advice to try to build trust and be a friend so that he feels safe in having a public discussion with me someday about how our two sides, what they need to do in order to resolve issues to get to a point where someday, even further in the future, we might be able to have these public discussions about doctrine. Here's the thing. It is hypocritical. It is hypocritical for them to call out atheists, to call out pro-choice people for being unwilling to defend their doctrine because it's inconsistent, and then turn around knowing that they're doing the same thing. I applaud you guys for calling them cowards. I applaud you for mocking them publicly for their unwillingness to engage you because they are inconsistent. Now look in the mirror. Saying that just because we're Christians doesn't make what you're doing not hypocritical. Look at all of those people that you call Christians. If it's a Roman Catholic, they're not Christian. Use some discernment. I'm not saying don't be friends with them. Yeah, that's fine. But if you believe your doctrine, then defend it. Doesn't matter who you're defending it against. Now, there are some arguments that I hear that I think are just like flat out dumb. People shouldn't be making them. And apparently they hurt people's feelings. That's not why I think they're dumb. Arguing Abby Johnson's speaking fees. I think it's totally fine to get paid whatever the market bears. Something that's commensurate with the nonprofit speaking racket. She can make $10,000 speaking engagement, so what? It's a dumb argument to say that their position's bad or she's bad for getting paid to do something. Now, should that argument hurt her feelings or any other person's feelings out there that gets paid for speaking engagements? No. Get some thicker skin. Another one that goes along with this that I think is a really horrible argument is to talk about their salaries as if it's a bad thing to make money as a CEO of a nonprofit organization or staff member for a nonprofit organization. Now, you can go ahead and argue the validity of wanting to do this for like any nonprofit, really. Like, should you donate money to something, to a nonprofit where 15 to 30 cents of the dollar goes towards the actual cost and the rest goes towards, like infrastructure, building, salaries, and things like this? Yeah, that's a fair question, and ask those questions of all nonprofits. But to argue against people because they are a head or a paid staff person at a nonprofit, I think that is just bad arguing. Who cares if they make $100,000, $200,000? If that's commensurate to another nonprofit that's not about abortion, so what? That's a horrible line of argumenting. I'm not against it because it hurts their feelings or it makes them feel bad. I'm against it because, like, who cares? I want to make money as a staff person at a nonprofit organization. Mm-hmm. That's fine. You want to make money lecturing? I have no issue with that. Sometimes I do think there are some people that have this as a career and feel their careers being threatened, but that's not all of them. So I don't think that that is an appropriate line of arguing either. Getting into some of their motives as to intentionally not wanting abortion ended because that would end their career. And yeah, I'm not sure that's the best line of argumentation either. Is it the case? Yeah, I'm sure it is for some people. Is it always the case? No, I don't think it is. I'd rather deal with the doctrinal positions and its application. And I think that's where we need to focus. So how do we get to a point where some of these influencers and organization heads and leaders that are reluctant to debate us, and I say that nicely, reluctant, they're unwilling to, they block us out, they censor us, they do not allow their organizations to engage us and debate us, and that's what Scott Klusendorf did. How do we get them to join us in public discourse, to join us in moderated public debate and discussion? I don't know. It's going to take them recognizing their own hypocrisy. It's going to take them recognizing that the excuses that they are making don't line up. It's going to take them being willing to stand on their own doctrinal positions and defend it against anyone that is willing to criticize them. I don't think that friendship evangelism is the way to go. You don't need to have trust or be a friend with the person that you're discussing doctrinal differences with. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Sure. You find people that you can trust, that you can be friends with. But are they necessary? They're not. But I'm willing to meet with anybody, to build whatever trust that you need to have built so that you feel safe enough to have a public conversation with me about what you think abolitionists need to do before we can come to the table and have a public debate about doctrine. So reach out to your pro-life friends, organization leaders. I don't know what the right thing to do is. Because on one hand, I applaud them for calling the pro-choice people cowards. Because that's what they're doing. They're being cowards. The pro-choice position is inconsistent. And their advocates are being cowardly by not engaging them in public debate. So I just encourage them to look in the mirror. Trust in your position and your ability to defend it, that it doesn't matter whether or not the abolitionist is going to do an ad hominem attack, say mean things, or argue in bad faith. If they do that, expose them. So, in the end, understand what it is that you believe. Don't be driven by blind faith into an ideology, but know why you believe the thing that you believe and defend it. Stand up and defend it. Until next time, join the resistance and wield the sword of truth. Our Lord has left us here to navigate through this world as priests in the kingdom of God. Apply the mind of Christ and battle against the culture that hates God and loves death.